What happened at your school that shocks you to this day? By the time we realized the notebooks weren't a prank, the person writing them had already been inside our school for 3 weeks, and no one had ever seen them come in or out. Back in middle school, this was when everyone had those cheap flip phones and spent way too much time texting. We started getting these random group messages from an unknown number. Not scary at first, just weirdly specific. It would mention things like what someone wore that day, or what they said in class, but twisted slightly, like it was watching, but not quite understanding. At first, we joked it was someone from our class trying to be creepy. Then it got stranger. One morning, a kid in my class found a notebook in his backpack that wasn't his. Inside were pages filled with handwritten observations, dates, times, little notes about different students. Nothing violent, just detailed. Too detailed. Things like leaves class 3 minutes early every Tuesday, or always sits second row, left side. Stuff you wouldn't notice unless you were really paying attention. The school brushed it off as a prank, told everyone to stop overreacting. But then more notebooks started showing up. Different handwriting each time. Different people targeted. Someone found one tucked into their gym locker. Another was left under a desk. It felt random, like no one was specifically chosen, but everyone was included at some point. Still, nobody really told their parents. We treated it like some bizarre mystery game. The part that gets me is what happened near the end. During a fire drill, we all went outside like usual. While we were standing there, someone noticed that the windows of one classroom had papers taped all over them from the inside. When we went back in, the room was locked. Teachers didn't know anything about it. Story 2. The kid who almost died in the cafeteria didn't just survive. He came back with a hard drive full of fake photos and a plan to burn everyone's reputation to the ground. It happened during lunch. Nothing unusual. Loud cafeteria, people joking around, trays clattering. One guy from a grade above me was messing around with his friends, standing on a chair, trying to grab something off a high shelf. Someone bumped into him by accident, and he lost his balance. He didn't just fall. He came down hard, straight onto the tiled floor. The sound alone made everyone go quiet for a second. At first, people thought he was just stunned, but then he didn't get up. His body started jerking in a way that didn't look right at all. Teachers rushed over. Someone yelled for the nurse, and we were all pushed back. I remember how suddenly the room went from chaos to this heavy silence, like nobody knew how to react. They cleared the area and called an ambulance. We were sent back to class like nothing happened, but no one could focus. He was gone for a while after that. Rumors went everywhere. Some said it was serious. Others said he'd be fine. Eventually, he came back, quiet, different, kept to himself more. And then, out of nowhere, things got strange again, but in a totally different way. A bunch of students started noticing edited pictures spreading around online. Not violent or anything, just bizarre. Photos of staff and students mashed together in weird situations, clearly fake, but done well enough to confuse people at first glance. It caused a lot of arguments, accusations, and drama. Turns out, he was behind it. Nobody really understood why. Maybe boredom, maybe frustration, maybe something else. The school took it seriously, and he ended up getting into trouble for it. Story 3. I thought I'd left my boring little school behind for good, until I turned on the news and saw its name flashing across every screen in the country. By the time the full story came out, I realized I hadn't escaped at all. I'd just been lucky enough to leave before the nightmare began. I had already moved away by then, but I spent most of my childhood in a small, quiet school where nothing ever really happened. The kind of place where everyone knew each other, and the biggest drama was who got in trouble for talking in class. A year or so after I left, I started seeing the school's name everywhere, on TV, online, people talking about it nonstop. At first I thought it was some kind of mistake, like maybe a minor incident that got blown out of proportion. It wasn't. Apparently, a situation unfolded involving someone connected to the school community and a couple of students. Details were confusing at first, different versions, rumors spreading faster than facts. But it quickly became clear it was something serious, something that didn't belong in a place like that. Story 4. The golden boy of our school didn't just fall from grace. He vanished into a crime so dark that even the news anchors stumbled over the details. There was a guy in my school who had everything going for him. Not just money, but structure. His family was known in the area, very respected, the kind people assumed had everything figured out. He wasn't a troublemaker either. Quiet, a bit reserved, but generally liked. Then, somewhere along the way, he started drifting into a different group. Nothing dramatic at first, just new friends, different habits, showing up less in class. Most people didn't think much of it. It's the kind of change you see all the time in school. Until one weekend changed everything. News started spreading that he'd been involved in a serious incident outside of school. At first it was vague, then details started coming out, each one one worse than the last. By Monday, it wasn't rumors anymore. It was confirmed, and suddenly his name was everywhere. The shock wasn't just what happened, it was who it involved. People couldn't connect the person they knew with the situation being described. After that, he disappeared from school completely. For a long time, all anyone heard were bits and pieces, legal proceedings, consequences, years passing. Eventually, people moved on. New classes, new students, different things to talk about. But years later, out of pure curiosity, I looked him up. What I found didn't match the ending I had imagined at all. He had rebuilt something resembling a normal life, steady work, a career in a technical field, even a small online presence that looked ordinary, like nothing had ever happened. Story 5. Back in high school, there was a period where tensions were always high. Not full-on chaos, but enough arguments, rival groups, and hallway confrontations that teachers were constantly on edge. Detentions and suspensions didn't really fix anything. It just pushed the problems around. Then one semester, something changed. Instead of cracking down harder, the PE department introduced this weird, structured activity during certain classes. It wasn't a normal sport, more like a controlled challenge. Two sides, one objective: move a heavy padded object from the center of the gym to your team's end zone. That was it. But the twist was in how it was played. There were rules, but they were broad. You couldn't actually hurt anyone on purpose, and you had to keep things within reason. But beyond that, it was mostly about teamwork, strategy, and physical effort. It got intense. People blocking, pushing, trying to outmaneuver each other. But teachers were always right there watching closely. At first, everyone thought it was just another random school idea that would fade out. But something unexpected happened. The same people who used to argue the most started focusing on winning instead. Instead of yelling at each other in the hallways, they were yelling instructions in the gym. It shifted the energy. Rivalries didn't disappear, but they turned into competition instead of actual conflict. Even outside of class, people started talking about plays, tactics, who was good at what. It gave everyone something shared to focus on. Over time, the tension around school noticeably dropped. Not completely gone, but calmer, more controlled. Story 6. The school didn't stop the fights by expelling anyone or calling in parents. They turned the entire cafeteria war into a gladiator-style game with a giant padded block. And somehow, it worked so well that kids who once wanted to kill each other started shaking hands. But here's what nobody realized. We weren't learning to get along. We were learning exactly how to take someone down without leaving a mark. There was a time when lunch breaks were tense. Not constant chaos, but enough arguments, stare-downs, and almost fights that everyone knew certain groups didn't mix. Teachers tried the usual stuff, warnings, punishments, but nothing really stuck. Then one day, everything shifted in a way nobody expected. Instead of more rules, the school introduced this odd challenge session during PE. It wasn't framed as punishment or discipline, more like a structured competition. The setup was simple. Two teams, a large padded object in the middle, and the goal was to carry or move it across a marked line on your side. But what made it different was how open it felt. You could block, push, strategize, work together, just nothing that would actually injure someone. Teachers supervised closely, but they didn't interfere much unless things got out of hand. At first, people treated it like a joke. Then it got competitive, really competitive. The same students who used to argue in the hallways suddenly cared more about winning these sessions. Instead of holding grudges, they started planning tactics, figuring out who should defend, who should charge, who could outmaneuver others. And weirdly, it changed the atmosphere. People still had disagreements, but they didn't spill over the same way anymore. It was like there was an outlet, a place where energy got burned off instead of building up. Over time, it became less about tension and more about tradition. Even students who had nothing to prove wanted to take part. It turned into one of the most anticipated parts of the week. Story 7. When we first started secondary school, there was a staff member everyone thought was just overly supportive, always offering extra help, always encouraging certain students to stay back after class. At the time, it didn't seem strange. Some teachers just take more interest, right? One girl in our year started spending a lot of time around him. She'd say she needed help with assignments or projects, and nobody really questioned it. If anything, people joked that she was the favorite student. Over time, though, things felt off. She'd get defensive if anyone asked about it, and she became more withdrawn from her usual friends. There were little signs, but nothing anyone our age could clearly piece together. It wasn't until much later, years later, that the truth came out. Apparently, what was happening wasn't just inappropriate, it was a pattern. More than one student had been drawn into similar situations, all under the same kind of extra help excuse. It only surfaced after someone finally spoke up as an adult, and others followed. There were investigations, statements, all of that, but the outcome didn't match what most people expected. He didn't just disappear overnight. Things dragged on, complicated and unclear, and somehow he remained connected to the education system for a long time. The part that really stays with me is how normal it all looked from the outside back then. Teachers trusted him. Students didn't understand what they were seeing. Even when rumors started, they were brushed off or dismissed. Story 8. There was a teacher we had one year who was known for being unpredictable, not strict in a normal way, but intense. You could walk into class on a calm day and everything would be fine. Then the next day, the smallest thing would set him off. It didn't take much. A whispered conversation, someone tapping a pen, even a wrong answer sometimes. When it happened, the whole room would freeze because you never knew how far it would go. His voice would rise fast, and once he started, he didn't really stop. I remember one moment especially clearly. A student was struggling to answer a question, clearly nervous, and instead of moving on, the teacher just kept pressing harder and louder. Then, out of nowhere, he slammed a stack of books onto the desk so hard that they slid off and scattered across the floor. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. It wasn't one of those moments people talk about later. It was just silence. What's strange is that outside the classroom, he had a completely different reputation. Other teachers spoke highly of him. Administration seemed to like him. Parents who didn't see him in that environment thought he was dedicated and passionate. By the end of the year, he was recognized for his work. There was an announcement, applause, even a small ceremony. I'll take a quick break here to remind you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments if you're enjoying the story, and tell us if something like this has ever happened to you. Story 8. This happened during my second to last year. It started off pretty normal. Two students were dating. Nothing unusual. They were always seen together, sitting side by side in class, walking everywhere as a pair. People knew them, but not in a dramatic way. At some point, they broke things off. Again, nothing too shocking. Breakups happen all the time. But not long after, she started spending time with someone else from the same year. That's when things began to spiral. At first, it was just gossip. People noticing who was hanging out with who, whispering during lunch, the usual stuff. But then someone claimed they had proof of something going on, and that's when it crossed the line. Screenshots started circulating, not explicit, but personal, messages, conversations, things clearly never meant to be shared. Nobody really knew who leaked them, but they spread fast. Within a day or two, almost everyone had seen at least part of it. The whole situation turned into sides being picked. People arguing, blaming, defending. It stopped being about the people involved and became this big spectacle. The school stepped in eventually. Meetings, warnings, consequences, but by then, the damage was already done. You can't really undo something once it's been passed around that much. Story 9. It was at my cousin's school, but I remember hearing about it almost in real time. It started like any normal day. Classes, chatter, nothing unusual. Then during a break, a student started quietly showing something to a few classmates out of his backpack. At first, they thought it was just some weird gadget or a joke, but the more they looked at it, the less funny it seemed. One of them got nervous enough to tell a teacher instead of keeping it to themselves. That's when everything changed. Within minutes, staff started moving quickly but trying not to cause panic. Certain hallways were cleared, classrooms were told to stay inside, and then eventually the entire school was guided outside without much explanation. Nobody really knew what was going on. Students were whispering, guessing, making things up. It wasn't until much later that the real situation became clear. Authorities arrived and handled it from there. From what I was told, the student had brought multiple dangerous items with him, not fully understanding, or maybe not caring how serious it was. After that day, he never returned to the school. Story 10. Primary school for me wasn't just classes and playground stuff. It felt like every year had some bizarre or stressful situation that nobody really knew how to handle properly. One year, the school had this ongoing issue with false alarms. Not the usual fire drill kind, random calls or messages that would force everyone outside while staff tried to figure out if it was serious. It happened often enough that younger kids started getting scared every time the bell rang unexpectedly. Eventually, people stopped reacting the way they should, which honestly made it worse. Another time, something strange kept appearing in the art room overnight. Supplies would be rearranged, projects moved around, even finished work altered slightly. Teachers thought it was students sneaking in, but no one ever got caught. It went on for weeks before it suddenly stopped with no explanation. There was also an incident nearby, not at our school, but close enough that we all heard about it immediately. It caused a lockdown, which for us was completely new and confusing at the time. Nobody really explained things clearly, so rumors filled in the gaps and made everything seem bigger and scarier than it probably was. For some reason, I ended up being the person teachers would rely on when things got overwhelming for the younger students. I wasn't officially assigned to anything, but if kids were crying or panicking, I'd be the one sitting with them, trying to calm them down, keeping them distracted until things settled. It just sort of became my role without anyone saying it out loud. What surprised me most happened at the very end. Story 11. It was a completely normal lesson. Quiet, a bit boring, everyone half paying attention. Then out of nowhere, this loud buzzing sound started echoing around the room. A wasp had somehow gotten inside and was flying in wide, unpredictable circles. Most people People just ducked or moved away, nothing serious. The teacher was trying to stay calm and was telling everyone to ignore it while figuring out how to get it out. But one guy in the class decided he was going to handle it. Instead of waiting, he suddenly jumped up and grabbed the nearest object, one of those heavy classroom stools. Before anyone could even react, he swung and launched it toward the insect midair. He missed completely. What he didn't miss was the tall display cabinet behind it. The stool slammed straight into it, and the glass front shattered instantly. The sound was insanely loud, like everything cracked at once. Bits of glass dropped everywhere, and the entire class just froze. The wasp, still flying around like nothing happened. The teacher just stood there for a second, processing what had just happened, before telling everyone to move away from the area. No one even knew what to say. The guy who threw it looked just as shocked as everyone else, like he hadn't thought it through at all. After that, the lesson was obviously over. Staff came in, cleaned everything up, and the story spread through the school within hours. Story 12. There was a guy in my year who had a reputation for pushing people too far. Not constant fights or anything, but the kind of person who didn't know when to stop. Always making comments, always trying to get a reaction. Most people avoided him. At some point, he started messing with the wrong person. Not directly, but through someone connected to them. People warned him to drop it, but he didn't take it seriously. To him, it was just more of the same. For a while, nothing happened. It almost felt like it had blown over. Then one afternoon after school, things changed. A car showed up just outside the school gates. Not unusual on its own, since parents were always picking people up. But this one just stayed there, engine running. A few people noticed, but nobody thought much of it at first. When the final bell rang and students started leaving, the situation escalated fast. The person the guy had been bothering was nearby, and suddenly there was shouting. It all happened in seconds, too fast for most people to even understand what was going on. Teachers rushed out, people scattered, and everything turned chaotic. Emergency services were called, and the area was cleared. After that day, the student who had been targeted didn't return to school. There were rumors about what happened next, family decisions, safety concerns, but nothing was ever confirmed publicly. The school tightened security after that. More staff at the gates, stricter rules about who could be around campus. Story 13. Back in lower school, we had this shared break time where 2 year groups mixed together. There was a small tuck shop where you could buy snacks, and most people didn't think twice about it. Just grab something and go. But one term, a specific snack suddenly became the thing everyone wanted. Not because it was rare or expensive, just because someone decided to make it feel that way. At first, it was subtle. A few students would buy extra and trade them later for something better. Chips for 2, or swap deals like that. Harmless stuff. Then it escalated. One guy in my class started showing up with way more than anyone reasonably needed. He'd sit at the edge of the tables, quietly passing things across, keeping track of who owed what. It wasn't loud or obvious. It was weirdly organized for something happening in a school playground. People started lining up around him during break like it was a mini market. I remember one day a teacher noticed the crowd and walked over, clearly suspicious. "Why is everyone gathered here?" she asked. No one answered properly, just shrugs and awkward silence. She looked straight at him and asked what he was doing. He tried to brush it off, acting casual, but you could tell he was panicking a bit. And then it happened. As he shifted in his seat, his bag tipped over slightly, and a bunch of the same snack packets slid out onto the ground all at once. Not just a few, a ridiculous amount. The whole group went completely quiet. The teacher didn't even raise her voice. She just stared for a second like she was trying to process how a kid managed to stockpile that much. After that, the whole thing got shut down immediately. New rules, stricter supervision, limits on what you could buy. Story 14. It was the end of the week. Everyone was loud and restless on the ride home. The usual mix of music, jokes, and people arguing over seats. Nothing felt out of the ordinary. Then the bus slowed down suddenly. At first, people just thought it was traffic or a stop, but then someone near the front stood up a little and pointed out the window. That's when the noise inside the bus started to fade, one voice at a time. There was a scene off the side of the road. Emergency vehicles, flashing lights, people moving quickly but carefully. Something serious had just happened, and even without understanding the details, you could feel it. The driver didn't stop, just rolled past slowly. But it was enough. Some students turned away immediately. Others couldn't. A few started asking questions all at once, like saying something would somehow make sense of it. No one really had answers. What I remember most is the shift in the atmosphere. A bus that had been full of energy just minutes earlier went completely quiet. Even the people who hadn't seen anything picked up on it. By the time we got home, nobody was joking anymore. People got off at their stops without the usual shouting or goodbyes. It felt like everyone was carrying something they didn't know how to talk about. No one at school really brought it up the next week either. It just became one of those shared experiences that everyone remembers but doesn't quite know how to discuss. Story 15. Our school had very strict uniform rules. Not just what you wore on the outside, but all these oddly specific guidelines that didn't really make sense to us as kids. Every so often, often, they would suddenly decide to enforce them more seriously. One term, they started doing these random checks. Classes would get called out one by one, and we'd be told to line up outside a specific office. No real explanation, just that it was about making sure everyone was following the dress code properly. But once you got inside, it felt different from what we were told. Instead of just checking things like shoes or skirts, it went further than anyone expected. Students were asked to adjust or move parts of their uniform in ways that made a lot of people uncomfortable. Nothing was explained properly, and no one really questioned it at the time because it was coming from authority. I remember feeling uneasy every time it happened. It wasn't fear exactly, just this strong sense that something wasn't right, even if I couldn't put it into words back then. Some students tried to avoid it altogether, taking longer routes between classes, staying in bathrooms, anything to not be called in. What's strange is how quiet everything stayed. There were no big discussions, no announcements to parents that I know of, nothing that made it feel like it was being handled openly. Then one day, it just stopped completely. Story 17. It was before lessons had properly started. One of those slow mornings where people were just wandering the corridors, talking, waiting for the bell. Nothing unusual. Then suddenly, people started moving fast. Not running at first, just walking quickly, then faster, then full-on rushing past me. Doors started closing, voices got louder, and there was this ripple of urgency that didn't make any sense if you hadn't heard what was going on. I grabbed someone I knew and asked what was happening, but they just shook their head and told me to get inside a classroom. No explanation, just panic in their face. By the time I got into a room, it was already filling up. Students from different classes, not just ours. The teacher locked the door immediately and went straight to the windows, pulling the blinds down. That's when it hit me that this wasn't a drill or anything normal. Everyone started talking at once. Half-formed rumors, guesses, things overheard. One person said someone had lost control. Another said there'd been a fight that got out of hand. Nobody really knew, but the fear was real enough. We stayed like that for a while, just waiting. Eventually, there was an announcement over the speakers. Calm voice, very controlled, saying the situation had been handled and students would be dismissed early. No details, just reassurance. I'll take a quick break here to remind you, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments if you're enjoying the story, and tell us if something like this has ever happened to you. Story 18. It started like any other morning. Nothing unusual. Same routine, same people, same noise in the hallways. Then things slowly started to feel off. Teachers were quieter, conversations were cut short, and a few students were being pulled aside one by one. When we got into class, our teacher didn't start the lesson. He just stood there for a moment, like he was trying to find the words. That alone was enough to make everyone uneasy. Then he told us that one of our classmates wouldn't be coming back. He didn't go into details right away, just said something had happened and that support would be available if we needed it. But the room already understood. You could feel it in the silence. What made it harder was how close it felt. This wasn't someone distant or barely known. This was someone who had been sitting in those same seats not long before. Same classes, same routines, same everything. After that, the day didn't really stop. It just shifted. We were allowed to step out if we needed to, talk to counselors, sit quietly. But at the same time, parts of the schedule kept moving. Some classes continued, some didn't. It felt disjointed, like nobody knew whether to pause everything or keep going. I remember later that day, there was still an event that had been planned for weeks. It went ahead anyway. People showed up, some tried to act normal, others just stood around not really present. Story 19. I went to a public primary school in a very struggling area where everything felt like it was held together by habit more than structure. Some kids came from families that were doing just okay, others from situations that clearly weren't. Everyone just kind of mixed in the same space and got on with it. Looking back, a lot of things didn't really register as strange at the time. They were just normal, like how some students would show up in completely worn-out uniforms that barely fit anymore, and teachers would quietly help them fix buttons or tape things back together without making a scene. Or how there was always at least one kid who basically lived off whatever food they could get at school because home wasn't reliable. I remember one boy in particular who always seemed older than he should have been in how he acted. He was quiet, rarely complained, and somehow always managed to stay out of trouble despite clearly having a rough situation. Other kids didn't really pick on him, not out of kindness exactly, but more like an unspoken understanding that he was dealing with things no one talked about. There were moments that now feel surreal in hindsight, like how often discipline depended entirely on which teacher you had that day. Some were patient, others were strict in ways that didn't always match the situation. It wasn't unusual for the same behavior to be ignored in one class and punished heavily in another. What stands out most, though, is how quickly we all adapted to everything. Kids learn fast. If something didn't feel fair, you still just accepted it because there wasn't really another option. Story 20. I went to a private school that was pretty strict on on image. On the surface, everything looked polished: uniforms, grades, discipline. But underneath, everyone knew there were students who constantly pushed boundaries. Nothing crazy every day, but enough small incidents that staff were always on edge. Then, near the end of one term, for students just disappeared. No goodbye, no explanation to the rest of us at first. One week they were there, sitting in class like normal, and the next week their seats were just empty. Teachers avoided the topic entirely, and students were told to focus on exams. Naturally, rumors filled the gap. It took a long time before bits of the truth started coming out, and even then it was always fragmented, different versions depending on who you asked. From what I eventually understood, the reasons weren't just one thing. It was a combination of repeated misconduct over years, escalating behavior, and a final set of incidents that crossed lines the school could no longer ignore. Two of them had always been known for causing disruption, not necessarily in one big dramatic way, but constantly. Arguments, disrespect towards staff, and a long history of warnings that never really changed anything. Eventually, it reached a point where the school decided enough was enough. The other two were more complicated. There was a situation involving inappropriate behavior on campus that spread quickly among students, even faster than staff could control. Once it became widely known, the response was immediate and final. They didn't return after that. Story 21. It was near the end of the school year. Everything already felt relaxed, half-empty classrooms, people thinking more about holidays than lessons. I was in class when the announcements started coming through, first in a calm voice telling us to stay where we were. At first, nobody took it seriously. We thought it was just some drill or technical issue. People were joking quietly, guessing we might get an early dismissal. Then the tone changed slightly. Staff started appearing at classroom doors, speaking to teachers in low voices, closing doors behind them. That's when the atmosphere shifted. We were told it wasn't a lockdown, but we still couldn't leave the room. No one really explained why. For a while, we just sat there, waiting, checking phones, trying to piece things together from whispers in the hallway. Time felt slow in a way I'd never noticed before. After some time, certain students were called out of class and sent to another location in the school. Others were told to go straight home, but not to open lockers or return to certain areas. Everything felt very controlled, but also unclear. When I finally got home, I saw messages from friends starting to circulate news articles. That's when the full picture slowly started to form. Story 22. It was just a couple of weeks before our final exams, and everyone was focused on practical assessments, coursework, and trying to scrape together final marks. The atmosphere was stressful but routine. Late nights, messy workshops, everyone half burnt out but pushing through. Then two students from our year just stopped showing up. At first, nobody knew why. Teachers didn't give details, and we assumed it was exam stress or illness. But as the days passed and they still didn't return, the concern in the class started building. Eventually, word started spreading that something serious had happened outside school involving both of them. It wasn't inside the building, but it was close enough to the school community that it shook everyone. There were conflicting stories going around. Some said it was a random attack. Others insisted there had been ongoing tensions that spilled over. Nobody in the school ever really got a clear official explanation beyond vague statements about an incident under investigation. What we did know was that both of them were badly injured and taken to hospital, and for a while it was uncertain whether they would fully recover. It was especially hard because both were well known in school, not troublemakers, just regular students who played sports, joked around, did their work like everyone else. In the middle of exam season, the school sent out instructions telling students not to speak to media or share information publicly. It all felt very controlled, like everyone was being quietly guided away from talking about it. Eventually, both students survived and later returned briefly to collect their exam results and take part in graduation photos. Seeing them there after everything was surreal, like the timeline had broken and somehow fixed itself again. Story 22. Back in middle school, we had a temporary teacher come in for a long stretch. She wasn't like the others. She talked to us like we were older, joked around a lot, and didn't keep that usual teacher distance. At the time, everyone loved her for it. Classes felt easier, more relaxed, and a lot of students started gravitating toward her. Looking back, the boundaries were blurry. Some students would linger after class just to talk. Others would mention messaging her outside school hours. It didn't feel weird back then. If anything, it felt like she got us more than other teachers did. That's how we framed it. Then suddenly, she was gone. No announcement, no explanation, just replaced like she'd never been there. When we asked, teachers brushed it off with vague answers. Most of us assumed she just found another job or something. But rumors started spreading not long after. At first it sounded like typical school gossip, exaggerated, messy, probably not true. But over time, more details kept lining up in a way that made it harder to dismiss. Eventually, it became clear something serious had happened involving inappropriate contact with a student. I remember the shift in how people talked about her. The same students who used to defend her or brag about knowing her suddenly suddenly went quiet. Some denied everything. Others tried to act like they'd always thought something was off. Story 23. I was walking back across campus one afternoon, half distracted and overthinking like usual. I'd been trying to work on not assuming the worst about every little thing, basically convincing myself that not every weird sound or situation meant something bad. Right on cue, I heard a sharp noise echo somewhere in the distance. It was quick, loud, and out of place. For a split second, my brain went, that didn't sound normal. But then I immediately started rationalizing it away. Construction work, something dropping, maybe even someone messing around with equipment. I actually remember nodding to myself like, see, you're improving. Not everything is a big deal. I got back to my room, sat down, opened my food, and pulled out my phone. And then my screen lit up. Campus alert. Urgent. The message was short and direct. Something had happened nearby, and everyone was being told to stay inside until further notice. That's when the earlier sound replayed in my head, except this time it didn't feel harmless anymore. Within minutes, group chats started blowing up. People were asking where everyone was, if they were safe, if anyone knew what was going on. Rumors spread fast, faster than anything official. From my window, I could see people moving quickly across parts of campus that were usually busy, but now felt tense and uncertain. It wasn't chaos exactly, just off. Like everyone suddenly realized something serious was unfolding at the same time. Story 24. I swear our middle school felt less like a place to learn and more like a social experiment nobody was supervising properly. One of the weirdest stretches was during 8th grade when things just kept escalating in the most random ways. First, there was this whole situation where a bunch of kids started organizing these challenges during lunch breaks. It wasn't anything official, more like groups gathering to show off toughness or settle dumb arguments. It got big enough that teachers eventually caught wind of it, and suddenly the entire grade was dragged into an assembly. The principal didn't even try to ease into it. He walked on stage already angry, started calling out the behavior in front of everyone, and at one point just slammed what he was holding onto the podium so hard it echoed through the hall. You could feel the mood shift instantly. People went from whispering and laughing to dead silent. Not long after that, another incident blew up for completely different reasons. Two students thought they'd found a hidden spot in a classroom to hang out during a period where supervision was pretty loose. It didn't stay hidden for long. Someone noticed, word spread, and by the next day it felt like the entire school knew. Both of them disappeared from classes for a while after that. And then there was this one kid who just didn't seem to care about any kind of rules. One day at lunch, he brought a school device out and started watching stuff he definitely shouldn't have been watching in a room full of people, not even trying to hide it. Teachers noticed pretty quickly, obviously, and that situation got shut down fast. After that, he stopped showing up altogether, and nobody ever got a clear answer why.